Before streaming services convinced you that newer means better, an entire decade of filmmakers were blowing up cars, staging real stunts, and printing genuine chaos onto celluloid. The 1970s didn't just produce action movies, it invented the modern action movie. Here's a wild fact. Several of these films were shot without permits, with real bullets and zero insurance. Tonight, you can watch all 12 of them absolutely free. Number 12. The French Connection, 1971. Nobody told Gene Hackman he was about to star in the most dangerous car chase ever filmed. And that's exactly why it works. The French Connection arrived in 1971 like a punch to the throat of Hollywood comfort. Director William Friedkin had already made a name for himself, but this film turned him into a legend. Shot on the filthy, freezing streets of New York City, this is a police thriller that feels less like a movie and more like someone accidentally left the camera running during an actual narcotics investigation. Hackman plays Detective Jimmy Popeye Doyle, a brutish, morally complex cop who will absolutely ruin your day if you get in his way. He is not charming, he is not clean. He is one of cinema's greatest anti-heroes precisely because Friedkin never softened him for the audience. The film is based on a true story, which only makes its gritty texture more unsettling. Real locations, real crowds, real danger. The famous elevated car chase under the Brooklyn subway tracks was filmed entirely without permits or road closures. Friedkin sent Hackman down those streets at 90 miles per hour while actual New York drivers swerved out of the way, completely unaware they were in a movie. At least one near collision was completely unplanned. That raw terror you see on Hackman's face is not entirely acting. Critics were stunned. Roger Ebert called it one of the best thrillers ever made. The Academy agreed, handing it 5 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor for Hackman. Made on a budget of around $1.8 million, grossed over $75 million worldwide. It proved that gritty realism could outperform Hollywood glamour at the box office, and the action genre never fully recovered from that revelation. You can find this one completely free through several public archive platforms and free ad-supported channels tonight. Number 11. Dirty Harry, 1971. Clint Eastwood didn't play a cop in this film. He played a philosophy, and America couldn't decide whether to worship it or fear it. Dirty Harry landed in December of 1971, like a grenade dropped into a cultural argument that was already burning. The country was divided over law enforcement, civil liberties, and what justice actually meant on streets that felt increasingly out of control. And then along comes Inspector Harry Callahan with his .44 Magnum, and that legendary speech about whether you feel lucky. The film was controversial the moment audiences saw it. Pauline Kael, one of the most respected film critics of the era, called it fascist in its politics. Andrew Sarris disagreed entirely. That debate raged in newspapers and university classrooms for years. Director Don Siegel crafted something that worked on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it's a cat-and-mouse thriller between Harry and a serial killer named Scorpio, a character loosely inspired by the real Zodiac killer who was genuinely terrorizing California at the time the film was produced. That real-world context gave the movie a cold, creeping dread that standard Hollywood thrillers couldn't manufacture. What most people don't know is that Frank Sinatra was originally cast as Harry Callahan, but had to drop out due to a hand injury. John Wayne turned it down. Paul Newman turned it down. The role that built the second half of Eastwood's entire career was everybody's second choice. The irony is almost beautiful. Made for approximately $4 million, it earned nearly $36 million domestically and spawned 4 sequels. Its influence on the action genre, on the template of the rule-breaking lone cop, is impossible to overstate. Every renegade detective in every action film that followed owes something to Harry Callahan. Number 10. Enter the Dragon, 1973. Bruce Lee only had 6 days after this film wrapped before he died. What he left behind changed the entire planet's relationship with action cinema. Enter the Dragon is one of the most important films ever made, not just in the action genre, but in the full context of world cinema. It was the first American-produced martial arts film, a joint production between Warner Brothers and Hong Kong's Golden Harvest Studio. The fact that it exists at all is somewhat miraculous. Bruce Lee had been fighting for years to get American studios to take him seriously as a leading man. They kept offering him supporting roles. He went to Hong Kong, became the biggest star in Asia, and forced Hollywood to finally pay attention. The film follows Lee as a martial arts expert, recruited by a British intelligence agency to infiltrate a crime lord's island tournament. The plot is essentially James Bond filtered through kung fu, and it is magnificent. The final Hall of Mirrors fight sequence between Lee and the villain Han remains one of the most visually inventive action sequences of the entire decade. Lee choreographed much of his own combat, and his physical precision was so extreme that the camera crew sometimes had to film at 32 frames per second, rather than the standard 24, just to slow him down enough for audiences to follow his movements. Lee died on July 20th, 1973. The film was released on August 19, 1973. He never saw its success. Made for approximately $850,000, it earned over $350 million globally. It opened every major market to Asian action cinema, launched the martial arts boom of the mid-70s, and created a template that everything from Jackie Chan films to the entire John Wick franchise still follows. Number 9. Serpico, 1973. This film almost didn't get made because the real Frank Serpico warned the producers they would be putting themselves in danger by making it. He wasn't joking. Sidney Lumet's Serpico is a film about a New York cop who refuses to take bribes and becomes the most hated man in his own police department because of it. Based on the true story of Frank Serpico, the film is a thriller where the protagonist is in more danger from his colleagues than from any criminal. Al Pacino delivers what many serious film scholars consider the performance of his career, which is an extraordinary statement, given that The Godfather came out the year before. What makes Serpico so electrifying as an action drama is its refusal to be comfortable. There's no cavalry coming. The system is the antagonist. Lumet shoots New York like it's a city that has decided to slowly digest a good man alive, and the grimy authenticity of every frame makes the film feel like documentary footage of a moral catastrophe unfolding in real time. The real Serpico, who was shot in the face during a drug bust in 1971, a shooting widely suspected to have been set up by corrupt officers, served as a consultant on the film. He reportedly wept when he saw Pacino's portrayal. He also moved to Switzerland shortly after the real-life events because he didn't feel safe in America. That level of real-world stakes bleeds directly into every scene. Serpico cost about $3 million and earned roughly $30 million at the box office. It directly influenced the formation of the Knapp Commission's investigations into police corruption and is studied today in film schools and criminal justice programs simultaneously. It belongs to both worlds equally. Number 8. Death Wish, 1974. This film was so controversial that New York City's mayor publicly condemned it, while New York audiences gave it a standing ovation. Both reactions were completely understandable. Death Wish arrived in 1974 at a moment when violent crime in American cities was genuinely spiraling. New York was in financial collapse. Times Square was a war zone, and ordinary people were terrified. Charles Bronson plays Paul Kersey, a pacifist architect whose family is attacked by street criminals. When the police fail to deliver justice, Kersey becomes a vigilante. The movie poses a genuinely uncomfortable question and then refuses to answer it cleanly. When institutions fail, what are ordinary people supposed to do? Director Michael Winner knew exactly what he was making and didn't apologize for a frame of it. Critics were divided in the most fascinating way. Some saw a dangerous fantasy that glorified frontier justice. Others saw an honest portrait of civic despair. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars. Audiences gave it a massive box office return, approximately $22 million on a budget of just under $3 million. What's often forgotten about Death Wish is how genuinely well it's crafted. Bronson's performance is subtle and deeply internal. He doesn't play Kersey as a hero who enjoys what he does. He plays a man who has been broken and is reassembling himself around something dark and hollow. That ambiguity is what gives the film its staying power and why it's been remade several times, most recently in 2018 with Bruce Willis. The film launched a franchise of 5 films and permanently established Bronson as one of the decade's defining action icons. Number 7. Taking of Pelham 123, 1974. Four criminals hijacked a New York City subway train and held passengers for ransom. The city had no plan. The movie is essentially a live-action demonstration of institutional chaos. The Taking of Pelham 123 is one of the smartest action thrillers of the 1970s, a film that almost nobody outside of serious cinema circles talks about today, but which belongs in every conversation about the decade's greatest movies. Walter Matthau plays a transit authority dispatcher who becomes the unlikely negotiator when armed men seize a subway car and demand $1 million in 1 hour. The clock structure, the radio-based tension, and the absolutely brilliant use of New York's collapsing infrastructure as both setting and thematic backdrop make this film feel modern in ways that are genuinely startling. Director Joseph Sargent shot entirely on location in the actual New York subway system, a system that was at the time genuinely decrepit, underfunded, and operating in a state of near-permanent crisis. The physical environment communicates the story's themes without a single line of dialogue. These institutions are barely holding together. Is it any surprise they fail when pressure is applied? Robert Shaw plays the lead villain with chilling precision. Number 6. 3 Days of the Condor, 1975. A CIA analyst goes out to get lunch and comes back to find everyone in his office murdered. That is not a setup. That is the first 10 minutes. 3 Days of the Condor is the kind of political thriller that could only have been made in the specific atmosphere of post-Watergate, post-Vietnam America, a country that had just watched its own government lie to its face repeatedly and was in no mood for reassurance. Robert Redford plays a low-level CIA researcher who survives an agency massacre and spends the rest of the film trying to figure out who inside American intelligence wants him dead and why. The answer, when it comes, is more cynical and more plausible than almost any action thriller released before or since. Director Sidney Pollack created a film where paranoia is not irrational. It is the appropriate response to an accurate understanding of reality. Faye Dunaway appears as a woman Redford's character essentially holds hostage at gunpoint and who gradually becomes his only ally. The relationship is deeply strange, and the film doesn't pretend otherwise. The famous final exchange of the film, where Redford's character asks a CIA superior whether a newspaper would publish evidence of government crimes, and the superior calmly replies, "How do you know they'll print it?" landed in 1975 as a question without a good answer. Critics praised its intelligence and its refusal to comfort audiences. Redford said in interviews that the film's story felt ripped directly from headlines he was reading every morning. Made on a modest budget, it earned around $30 million and remains one of the essential political action films of the American cinema canon. Number 5. Rollerball, 1975. In 1975, a filmmaker made a movie about corporations replacing governments, eliminating individuality, and using violent spectacle to keep the population distracted. He called it science fiction. We might call it a documentary. Norman Jewison's Rollerball is one of the most underrated and genuinely prophetic action films in cinema history. Set in a future where corporations have replaced nation-states, the film follows Jonathan E., played by James Caan, the greatest star of a brutal sport called Rollerball, a hybrid of roller derby, motorcycle racing, and combat designed to demonstrate that individual effort is pointless. When the corporations try to force Jonathan into retirement because his continued excellence is inspiring dangerous individualism in audiences, he refuses. That refusal becomes an act of revolution. The film was expensive, strange, and absolutely serious about its ideas in ways that baffled some audiences and thrilled others. Critics in 1975 were divided. Some called it cold and overly cerebral. Others recognized immediately that Jewison had made something that would only get more relevant with time. They were correct. James Caan delivers a performance of remarkable restraint, a man who has given everything to a system that now wants to eliminate him for being too good. The climactic final rollerball match, played under rules that have been progressively eliminated until there are no rules remaining, is a sequence of sustained, escalating violence. Number 4. Marathon Man, 1976. Dustin Hoffman prepared for a scene by staying awake for 3 straight days. His co-star, Laurence Olivier, looked at him and said, Have you tried acting? That story tells you everything about this film. Marathon Man is a paranoid thriller, a conspiracy movie, and a genuine horror film wearing an action movie's clothes. John Schlesinger directed this labyrinthine story of a history Ph.D. student in New York who becomes entangled in a plot involving a Nazi war criminal, CIA operatives, diamonds, and a level of violence that shocked audiences who thought they knew what to expect from a thriller. Dustin Hoffman plays Babe, the student, with such committed physical terror that watching the film feels at times like watching someone genuinely suffer. Laurence Olivier plays the villain, a former Nazi dentist nicknamed the White Angel, with a soft, educated malice that is somehow worse than any amount of screaming could be. The dental torture scene is one of the most effective pieces of sustained dread in all of cinema. Olivier received an Academy Award nomination. He deserved it. The question, "Is it safe?" repeated quietly during that scene, became one of cinema's most memorable pieces of dialogue, despite meaning almost nothing out of context. The film is based on William Goldman's novel, and Goldman himself wrote the screenplay, which is a rare stroke of luck in Hollywood adaptations. Made for approximately $8 million, it grossed over $28 million domestically. It sits at the intersection of the decade's paranoid political cinema and its appetite for genuine visceral shock, a combination that produces something genuinely unforgettable. Number 3. The Outlaw, Josie Wales, 1976. Clint Eastwood fired his director 2 weeks into production and took over himself. The fired director had actually written the screenplay. That kind of tension lives in every frame of this film. The Outlaw, Josie Wales is the greatest American Western of the 1970s and one of the greatest Westerns ever made. Full stop. Eastwood plays a Missouri farmer who watches Union soldiers murder his family during the Civil War and spends the rest of the film becoming something terrifying in pursuit of the men responsible. But calling it a revenge film undersells it significantly, because what Eastwood, both as director and star, actually builds is something more surprising. A story about a violent man who gradually, reluctantly, accumulates a family of broken people who need him to be more than a weapon. The film's structure is extraordinary. Every character Josie Wales meets is someone destroyed by the same war that destroyed him. A Cherokee chief, an elderly woman displaced from her home, a young Navajo woman, a Kansas farm family who has lost everything. Josie collects them without wanting to, protects them without admitting it, and eventually fights for them with everything he has. The practical stunt work in this film is breathtaking. Eastwood was committed to physical authenticity. Number 2. The Driver, 1978. Ryan O'Neal plays a getaway driver. He has no name. He barely has dialogue. He has never been more compelling in his entire career. Walter Hill's The Driver is one of the most purely cinematic action films of the entire decade, and one of the most influential films nobody in general audiences seems to have actually seen. It's a stripped-down, almost abstract chase thriller about an unnamed getaway driver being hunted by an unnamed detective, played by Bruce Dern, who becomes so obsessed with catching him that the pursuit itself becomes a kind of madness. The film has minimal backstory, minimal explanation, and maximum style. The car chase sequences in The Driver are technically extraordinary. No CGI, no safety rigs beyond what was absolutely required, and a level of precision driving that stunt coordinators still study. Hill reportedly rehearsed the chase sequences like choreography, breaking each movement down, mapping it against the physical environment of Los Angeles, and insisting on capturing everything practically. The result is action filmmaking as pure kinetic poetry. Number 1. Assault on Precinct 13, 1976. John Carpenter made this film for $100,000. Studios told him it was unwatchable. Then it screened at the London Film Festival, received a standing ovation, and European critics declared him a genius. American studios still passed on it. Assault on Precinct 13 is the film that launched John Carpenter's career, established his uncompromising voice, and produced one of the most relentless siege thrillers in cinema history. all while being made in 20 days on a budget that most Hollywood productions spend on catering. Carpenter was 27 years old. He had made one feature before this. He wrote the script, directed, edited, and composed the iconic synthesizer score himself. That score alone, built on a repeating, hypnotic groove that gets under your skin within seconds, would have been enough to announce the arrival of a major talent. The story is elegantly brutal. A nearly empty police precinct on its last night of operation is besieged by a massive gang in a near-future Los Angeles that has completely abandoned its own communities. Inside the precinct is a skeleton crew of officers, a secretary, 2 prisoners, and a death row inmate played by Darwin Jostin, whose quiet charisma steals the entire film. There are no negotiations. There is no reasoning with the force outside. The gang in this film functions almost as a natural disaster, nameless, faceless, implacable. Carpenter has said the film was consciously modeled on Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo, a story of professionals maintaining dignity and courage under siege. But where Rio Bravo has warmth and camaraderie woven throughout, Assault on Precinct 13 operates under a cold, modern dread that... So there they are. 12 action classics from the greatest decade in action filmmaking history, all available for free tonight. The real question I want answered in the comments is this: do you think any film made in the last 20 years genuinely matches the raw, unpolished intensity of what filmmakers created in the 70s with almost no money and zero safety nets? Because the argument can be made, and I'm willing to make it, that Hollywood hasn't produced a single truly dangerous action film since digital effects replaced the genuine risk of doing it for real.